Good morning. Before I read these words from Martin Luther King, I would just invite us to take a deep breath or two to bring our whole selves into this time and space, and invite you to attune yourself to receiving during this hour that which is meant for you to hear and to feel and to understand. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
And now for our chalice lighting. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite in worship and fellowship. As an extension of lighting our chalice, I want to take a moment of silence to light 3 candles for some of the names of those who have recently been affected by police brutality. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected. So I will light a candle for the life of Omar Cryer, for the life of Tori Brown, and for the life of Atania Jefferson. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that Black Lives Matter. And now our opening hymn, 1017, Building a New Way.
Sid your teal hymnal, please find it and rise and sing along. And this is a fun hymn, so sing with enthusiasm. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free, hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without peace, the world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
And now is the time in our service for joys and sorrows. If you're visiting us for the first time, this is the time when you can introduce yourself. For those who are gathering in person, we invite you to raise your hand and then stand where you're seated and speak aloud your name and your joy or sorrow. I will give you the microphone to speak into. We invite you to share whatever is in your heart. For those who are joining us online, we invite you to raise your hand, and when Mike directs you to unmute your microphone, share with us what's in your hearts. So I will be right there. Wait, glasses off, mask on, microphone in hand. Okay, here we are. Who has something to share?
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here because my name is Ronald Washington. I actually represent the founder of the church, Francis Shaw, and his family. For the last 10 years, I've been on a journey representing the works of the Shaw family, as well as a particular mission that I received while living in the Shaw house. So that's my mission. I have worked here. I produced a play that was done here once before pertaining to Harriet Tubman and the relationship that she had with the 54th Infantry. I'm on a mission actually because my relationship to Francis Shaw while living in the house with him, he would sit on the edge of my bed and we would have a relationship. And part of that is the fact that he doesn't want us to remember his son as Robert Gould Shaw and the 54th. He wants us to remember him in a more inclusive way as Robert Gould Shaw with the 54th. So for the past 10 years, I've been in South Carolina. I've also done some other national works in relationship to the mission in which I'm taking on. So it's a pleasure for me to be here today. And I'm pleased to see all of you that are here that's participating in the house of the family as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was lovely. Thanks.
So I have a joy, and that is Tom and I will be leaving tomorrow to visit my granddaughter and my daughter and her husband in Vancouver, Canada. And this past week, I mentioned last week, we had a couple of deaths in the family. And, you know, we always make fun of the in-laws. You know, are they the in-laws, the mother-in-law, the whatever, you know. And the two people that passed away were in-laws. And the thing is that really in-laws become part of your family. And there was quite a nice outpouring of thoughts about my sister's husband. So, you know, it's important to keep your family close as much as you can. It's really hard work because, you know, we have kind of a large family, we're spread out, but it's really good to try to keep them close. What the other good thing that happened as a result of these two deaths is I got to spend more time with nieces and nephews who I only see usually once a year. And I got to really talk to them for the first time in a long time. So, hey, you know, it's good that come out of anything.
Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Chris Johnson. One joy I have is that on Mother's Day, which obviously was a few weeks ago, one of the gifts I received from my family was an outdoor hammock. And my joy is that today they're coming back to put it together.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Rachel Walters. My joy is I just got back from Long Island, and my granddaughter Brianna, who's 14, is not only a member of the National Honor Society, but she's admitted into National Musical Honor Society. She plays the piano. I'm very happy for her. In 2 weeks, she takes her regents and, and her other finals. So I'm really very proud of her. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Janice Lovegrove, and I just moved to Staten Island a month ago to be near my daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren, age 3 and 7 weeks. And I come from Bethlehem, PA, where I was a member of the UU Church there about 8 years over my spiritual journey. The thing that makes me smile being here today is that my daughter and son-in-law say the coolest people go to the U Church. Now, not that they're here because they're very busy, but they come once in a while. But anyway, their names are Megan Joseph and Alan Avedano, and they know some of the folks here.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody else here? Well done.
I was just going to say I know Megan. she curated an art show with me at Staten Island Arts.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay, this is just an update on Harry Hicks. He's in Staten Island Care Center recovering. And well, people who know Harry, he's been a long-term member of the church, know that he's not the most social person. So if you go visit him, you probably won't be there too long. Just go in and say hello, and he'll be happy. The other thing is he would appreciate cards, I'm sure, because that's easy. You just send him a card, we'll be able to read it, and that'll be good. Thank you.
Yes, Harry is not noted for small talk.
Hi, I'm Linda, and I haven't been here in quite a while because I had a new granddaughter that my son and his wife would ask me to come every Saturday morning and stay till 5, and then it became Sundays as well. They have now moved to New Jersey, and I will not be doing every weekend driving to New Jersey. So I've now been freed to have a life on Saturdays and Sundays. So thank you. So my first thing was to come here.
Good, good. Good to see you back. Okay, is that everybody? Okay. Okay. So, was there anything in the chat? Mike? Nothing in the chat. Okay.
I'm going to say something to the chat people. This weekend is Suzanne O'Callahan's birthday and also Kevin Clark's birthday.
Oh, okay. Okay, did we get that? This weekend is Suzanne O'Callahan's birthday and also Kevin Clark's birthday. Okay, that's it. We all set? Am I all set? Let's see. Okay, we have shared. So now for the meditation. For all of the joys and sorrows we've heard, and for all of those that go unspoken, we're grateful for sharing them in community. Let us enter into a moment of silence and reflect on the joys and sorrows we have spoken and on the ones left unspoken, but carried in our hearts this morning. So just a moment of silence. May the words and the silence we have shared remind us that no matter our joys or sorrows, we are not alone. May it be. You want to do it now? Yes, okay. And so we're going to move to the offertory before we hear the speaker, which is our usual mode. So now is the time in our order of service where we take an offering. We know it's the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For those in person, we invite you to drop off your offering in the basket at the left of the stage as you exit the parish into the parish hall after the service. For those online, links and instructions are posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate to our PayPal giving page. Please give as generously as you can. Our offering will now be gratefully received with offertory music from Kevin, Carolyn, and the choir, and it's Let Justice Roll Down.
There's no freedom, no lies unsaid, let justice roll down, roll down, cry out, shelter and bread, let justice roll down, like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't forget we walk together, believe in the dream, in the way things walk, we will make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hate, fickle weather, drive away, let love roll down, roll down. Remember our hearts and make us sway, let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't get weary, all together, believe in the dream, in the way gets up, and it's up the way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Down the beat, friends, our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. Voices ring out, our love that runs, let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't get weary, hold together, believe in the dream, in the way it's what will lead the way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. When the skies up to strike the glow, let songs roll down, roll down. If poets remind us what we know, let songs roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't get weary, all together, believe in the dream, in the way gets up, in the new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. One step and one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. If you love one, dream is on, let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, all together, believe in the way gets up, and in the way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
Thank you, Kevin and Carolyn and the choir. And now we're going to have hymn 131, Love Will Guide Us. Oh, no, not, yes, we changed the order here, so it's a little confusing, and I'm not sure which hymn we're doing, Kevin. So go back to the reading. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, so the following readings, are from the Hebrew Bible, the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 32 and 10. God enacts justice for orphans and widows, and God loves strangers, giving them food and clothing. That means you must also love strangers because you were strangers and enslaved in Egypt. Remember the days long past. Consider years long gone. Ask your father and mother, and they will tell you about them. Ask your elders, and they will give you details. And from Martin Luther King Jr., the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And so now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Reverend Dr. George McClain, who is no stranger to our congregation, nor to our neighborhood, because he lives just 3 houses away from us on Clinton, and he's been there for 51 years. So for 25 of those years, he served as National Executive of the Methodist Federation for Social Action. He recently served as interim pastor of Park Slope United Methodist Church in Brooklyn. As the John J. Markey Visiting Scholar at the College of Staten Island, 2018 to 2020, he engaged in research into the history of enslavement and resistance on Staten Island. And his sermon is Black Reconstruction and White Rage in the 1960s, a Personal Witness. George.
Liturgical sip of water. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you again today. Am I speaking enough into the mic now? It's like trying to treat it like a black popsicle. You know. To be with you today again, and to share with you something on the most important theme of Black Reconstruction and White Rage. Or you could call it Black Advancement and White Rage. And I will talk about it with reference to some of my personal participation, but I also want you to, at the same time, be reflecting on your participation in movements for justice and peace at the same time. Now, in many ways, I was quite an unlikely candidate to get involved in the civil rights movement, 1963, 1965. Do you know what a sundown town is? That term is used to refer to towns. It could be a county, it could be a neighborhood, where Black people were, through threat of violence or rules, were prohibited from staying after sundown. I grew up I was born in a sundown town, in a sundown county, Adams County, Indiana, where my parents were also born. And I recently discovered why that was the case. As is the case with many sundown areas, there was a precipitating act of violence that essentially chased Black people out. And that happened in 1905 in Decatur, Indiana. There was no note of it in the local papers, but the New York Times picked up on it. The very few Blacks who were living there were driven out by a mob, and none deemed to live there perhaps until quite recently. That's part of my background. Some of you may share something like that. Often, though, as we think about the history of Black movement in the United States, or what became the United States, we concentrate on the heinous acts of violence that have taken place. And those are not to be forgotten by any means. But just as important, if not more important, are the acts of courage, of reconstruction, we might call it, of advancement that have been taken by people in so many varied ways. That's the reason I chose a couple passages from the Hebrew Bible about remembering. The Hebrew people have gifted us with the importance of remembering where we come from. And in their case, they celebrated the liberation from enslavement in Egypt. And they kept reminding themselves of that. And remembering, for instance, to remember to welcome the stranger because they themselves had been strangers in Egypt. So I think it's really important for us to remember where we have come in this land around issues of racial justice. To my mind, there have been 5 major eras in American history of Black Reconstruction coupled with white rage, or we could call it Black advancement and white rage. The first era was during that of the American Revolution. The second was the era leading up to the American Civil War and the decade following it, which is typically called Reconstruction period. The third was the time of the Great Migration of millions of African Americans from the South to the North and the West. And the fourth was the era of the Civil Rights Movement embracing the 1950s and 1960s. We'll get later to the fifth era. In each of these eras, major Black Reconstruction or advancement was accomplished, but it was accompanied by intense resistance, which Black scholar and Professor Carol Anderson terms white rage. That's the title of a recent book of hers. And this white rage, as she describes it, has taken form of, in cases, violence, legal restrictions, customs, or the promulgation of vicious lies, various forms. It doesn't just have to be overt violence to be expressions of white rage. In each of these eras, major Black Reconstruction or advancement was accompanied by this white resistance. And let me illustrate these. In the Revolutionary era, African Americans caught the spirit of liberty and freedom, and many of them bought or stole their freedom in expanding numbers and established their own institutions like churches, families, benevolent institutions, businesses. As they began to become a recognized community with a bit of voting power, whites resisted it by making it virtually impossible for them to vote or to have the power to vote. But still, through all of this, the groundwork was laid for the emergence of the abolition movement later on. And one of the great accomplishments of that period, by the way, was the transformation of segregationist, white supremacist Christianity to a Black liberation theology. Another instance would be that after the Civil War, when Black Americans sought education and economic advancement, they were stripped of their land. And as you know, Jim Crow laws were set up across the South and much of the North as well. And still, Blacks persisted. They fought lynching. I think of Ida Wells Barnett, for instance, who together with W.B. Du Bois helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in around 1905, I believe. When the Great Migration brought millions of African Americans a new mobility, decent pay, and freedom from the cruelest forms of Jim Crow, banks and real estate power crowded them into neighborhoods and ghettos where the worst housing was available. But still, through all of that, the river of freedom continued to flow and brought profound changes in the life of all Americans, say through the Harlem Renaissance, for instance. And when during the fourth era of the 1950s and 60s, when voter suppression was outlawed through civil rights laws, and segregated schools were declared unconstitutional, devious ways were found to work around these and to create white schools with public funds, for instance. But still, enormous strides were made through that era that we inherit today. These last examples, of course, come from the fourth era, and many of you, as I, have lived through that great era. I was a witness and a minor participant in the civil rights struggles in the South in 1963, 1965, in Alabama and Mississippi. It was white rage that sent me to Alabama. I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and the Mother's Day weekend, there was an attempt to assassinate Martin Luther King in Birmingham, a bombing of the motel where he was supposedly staying. He wasn't there that evening and survived, but that sent shockwaves across the country, and Union Seminary decided they needed to do something in response, and there was this opportunity to send somebody to Birmingham to work with the Alabama Council on Human Relations, and they needed somebody, and what I, with my theology, would term the hand of God was placed on my shoulder when my friend said, "George, do you want to go to Birmingham?" And my life changed forever. In Birmingham, I was privileged to witness the incredible nature of this era of Black Reconstruction, where hundreds had gone to jail, where thousands of school children were imprisoned in what was called the Children's March. Part of what I did down there was to work in a CME church, Christian Methodist Episcopal congregation. It's a Black denomination called Thurgood CME. The way that this congregation was willing to move with the movement. You know, all of us have a tendency to go along in order to get along. And that's true of many African Americans across the South. But with the movement in Birmingham that spring, churches were asked to step forward. And one of the ways was to host a mass meeting on a Monday night. And these moved from one church to another. And Thurgood participated in that as well. Now, this was a courageous thing because Birmingham had the nickname of Bombingham, appropriately, because there were so many unsolved bombings that were taking place over the decades. The parsonage of the church, a relatively new parsonage where Reverend Lindsay and his family lived, was in an area that was nicknamed Dynamite Hill, because it was always a place where such bombings took place. Reverend Lindsay and his family invited me to live with them. And that was an enormous act of courage because of this history of bombing. I know that I learned later the extent to which that was an act of courage when Mrs. Lindsay would, I would chat with her, you know, over the decades, and she would over and again apologize for having my room be the room, the one that stuck out closest to the street and would therefore be most vulnerable to any bombing. So that's suggested to me how what a courageous act that was for them to endanger themselves and their three little boys, one of whom later became Jay Leno's percussionist, and with whom I rolled in the lawn and on the living room floor joyfully. That was just one specific example of the kind of courage that constituted this enormous outpouring of reconstruction, of advancement. One of the other things I did was put together an interracial student college fellowship during the summer. Many Black or white students might have connected with people of the other race where they were in college, but never back home in Birmingham. We helped make that possible. Among the participants were a number of Unitarians. In fact, the Unitarians was sort of the epicenter of the small, beleaguered white liberal community in Birmingham in those days. The way in which I had a brush with white rage during that summer, two things. There was a group called the National States' Rights Party. It was in competition with the Ku Klux Klan for being the nastiest, for being the most violent, the most outspoken. I went to one of their rallies, hoping that I would not be identified, and heard the venom that embodied people. You can't quite, at least I couldn't quite imagine that really people believed this stuff. So I went to hear it for myself. And the nature of that rage was just overwhelming. The other brush had to do with the fact that one of the things I did that summer was put together a vacation church school for the kids of the church in the neighborhood. And at the end of that week, it was customary to have a picture taken of all the participants. And Chris McNair, a photographer in Birmingham, came and took the picture of the group. When I got back to seminary in September, that's when the 4 little girls were killed in that explosion at 16th Street Baptist Church. And Chris McNair's daughter was one of those, Denise. There was a memorial service at Town Hall, and Chris McNair was there. And I went up to him and said, what do you say? I'm sorry. So Denise McNair is always be close to my heart. Another example of this era of Black Reconstruction and white rage, I experienced during the Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964, when about 1,000 of us, Black and white, mostly white, from North and West, were invited into Mississippi to help with voter registration. And what this wonderful idea was conceived to since the Democratic Party was totally segregationist, was to create what was called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, an alternative Democratic Party, and to enlist as many people as possible in that party so as to show the National Democratic Party who really were the Democrats in Mississippi. So we were encouraged to go, asked to give an assignment to go out into the countryside and get people to sign on to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. So for day after day, a Chicago school teacher and I would travel out into the rich cotton land of Mississippi and go to these sharecropper cottages, cabins. Remember pictures from Walter Evans, very much like that, and invite these people to sign on. This was, some didn't want to talk to us. They were scared, but many were willing to listen. And they may have been one of the first times that somebody white was talking to them about their rights in a positive way. And many of them signed on. That was really dangerous because they were in vulnerable positions. If they were thrown off their land, where would they go? And yet they were willing to do that. Now, that was the Reconstruction part, just amazing. The rage part, of course, was embodied in many ways by all the churches that were bombed that summer in Mississippi, because they held meetings to encourage the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Even at the beginning of the summer, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were killed. We were trained for 2 weeks in Miami, Ohio, and as I was part of the second week, and when we arrived that Sunday, we were informed, the first meeting by Bob Moses, that 3 of the group that had just left from where we were were missing. And to be missing in Mississippi was to be dead. The white rage. I was in Selma. You remember there was this very forceful attempt to go up against the discrimination against voting. About 1% of the Black population in Dallas County were registered to vote. This was being forcefully challenged. And as a part of that, the march from Selma to Montgomery began. And if you remember, John Lewis was badly beaten at that, and it was turned back. In response, 2 days later, Martin Luther King said, well-meaning people, above all from the religious community, come down and help us and march with us. We're gonna do this. The teammate I was working with, I was working to help build bridges between Blacks and whites on college campuses in the South, especially through the Methodist student movement. Anyway, we were free and able to go. Also, who went was a minister, a Unitarian minister from Boston, James Reeb. That day, we marched a little bit and had to turn back. Later that evening, Jim and several friends took a wrong turn after eating, and Jim was badly beaten. And we held vigil for 8 days before he finally died. Probably a story that you're aware of. I was at his funeral. Martin Luther King, of course, was the main preacher. It was so crowded that I had to sit on a windowsill. Fortunately, the windowsills were a little deeper than these. And it was a time of deep sadness, but also there was a spirit of defiance as we sang with heavy hearts and grim determination that whatever the cost, ain't going to let anybody turn me around. The spirit of Black Reconstruction, and in the midst of the white rage. Now, you Unitarians, Universalists, have led the way among predominantly white religious denominations in active remembering. You have a program called Living Legacy. Your minister, Susan Carlson, a few years ago, told me about this program and about a gathering at the time of the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery campaign and invited me to join in, which I did. It was an amazing program. For instance, we were addressed by one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Part of that time was going to, we were both in Birmingham and in Selma. In Selma, we went to the spot where Reeb was attacked. There's a wonderful mural on the side of a building there and kind of an open space. And we gathered there for memorial time. And I happened to be standing next to James Reeb's daughter, one of his daughters, who was 3 when she died. And I chatted with her for a little bit. It felt like, you know, somehow talking to the daughter of a saint, you know. I hope some of you, if you haven't gone on, have any of you gone on a Living Legacy trip? What, you know, they take people around to visit the sites and the people who were deeply involved in the civil rights movement back then, and acquaint you with the witness that the Unitarians have made over time, which has been really profound. I hope you'll consider sending a couple of you on one of these trips as a part of your witness. Now, you must have concluded by this time that the fifth era of Black Reconstruction and white rage is the one that we're living in right now. I heard that declared by Reverend, Barber. Thank you, Reverend William Barber, at a meeting in one of the churches where the movement 50 years earlier was nurtured. So we are experiencing this new era, this present era of Black Reconstruction. It's really a much more broadly colored, rainbow inflected community that is leading it. Those of us who are trying to be faithful allies are being taught new lessons all along. And I know it's so easy for us to be discouraged by what is going on, the fights over textbooks, the massacres, most recently in Buffalo, that are so clearly racially motivated. The division in our country, I'm convinced, is mostly because of the fear of power being developed by people of color, and that this was magnified so much when Obama became president, and that was so unthinkable in so many people's minds that they sort of misdedicated their lives to fighting this. And this whole thing about replacement theory, you know, this is vicious stuff. So we can become discouraged. But I want to say it's important for us to remember that looking at all these various eras of Black Reconstruction and white rage, that the white rage appears as the Black Reconstruction is happening, that it's a negative response to a positive movement, and it doesn't kill it. It doesn't, or at least it hasn't killed it. And we never know what future will take. But I do believe what Martin Luther King said, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends at justice. So my central message to myself and to us is for us to keep hoping, keep learning, keep growing. This new era is teaching us things that those of us in the fourth era of the civil rights movement never thought about. We were just fighting against legal segregation. We weren't thinking of in broader terms about the nature of white supremacy throughout our whole entire culture. Some amazing things are happening. The reason, people are fighting against textbooks, certain textbooks, is the textbooks, so many of them now, give a much fuller and correct view of American history. And if you look at the faces on television, if you look at what's happening culturally, if you look at the kinds of exhibitions at museums, they are so multicolored these days. And a lot of people just hate that. They aren't going to be able to stop it. It's happening. And we need to celebrate the good that's going on. We need to fight like heck against the evil, the displacement theory, all of this stuff. But keep in mind the hope. Remember that in the past, this has happened before, and still the river of freedom, as Vincent Harding puts it, has continued to flow plenteously. To remember that the moral universe, the arc of moral universe, is long, but it bends at justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you so much for this sort of reminding us of everything that that we were familiar with in history, and just bringing it one step and the next step and the next step to the very place where we are today. So I so appreciate what you shared with us this morning, your personal experience. And on this at this point, Kevin is going to lead us in hymn 131 in your hymnal, Love Will Guide Us. Through the dark night, from greed to giving, love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, hear from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. I invite you to join me in extinguishing the chalice. Please repeat after me if you know the words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Let me just extinguish. Now the benediction.
I invite you now, as you move forward into the next phase of your life, as you have your congregational meeting and think about adopting the 8th principle, that you move forward, not with a sense of being victims, but as shapers, to listen and to learn, to bring justice, let love grow, remembering that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Thank you so much. And now Carolyn with the postlude. Thank you.